I'm coming to this whole space really from the innovation perspective, having applied it in many different industries. And by doing so, you realize that often inclusiveness is more associated with the lack of exclusiveness rather than assigning a particular value to inclusiveness. So the first thing we need to probably do is define, you know, what value are we getting out of inclusiveness. Before I do so though, since this is about innovation, it's also a wonderful buzzword. How about we first define what innovation is, right? And there are a lot of studies about that and a lot of words being lost on it, but I like to use the definition of finding new ways to create new value. That's really what innovation is about. And the worst thing we ever did to innovation was label it as something different, because value is created in many companies that don't call themselves innovative and in many different shapes. But if you take this definition, then creating and delivering new value means that actually there is a requirement for adoption at the end. So you don't have an innovation if the target user doesn't see the value or can't access the value. And I think that's important to understand, because the consequence is that we have to look at every target user of our innovations as a part of an ecosystem. And every piece of that ecosystem can be a barrier to the adoption of that innovation. And so we can't just assume a value that we are creating, you know, people will jump on it and just use it and run with it and be happy for all eternity. That typically doesn't work that way. And so from there then, inclusiveness makes so much more sense, right? Because inclusiveness, if you look at a very simplified innovation process with an input, a process, and an output. On the input side is getting actually the people at the front line giving input to innovation, right? That's inclusiveness. This is not a forced, okay, I inform you about what I'm doing. It's about, what do you know? What are the insights you can bring to the table that we can design for? And that means you need to deeply understand your target user, right? So there's a huge benefit for inclusiveness, and nowadays we have the technology, right? Crowdsourcing is just one great example where you can over distance reach large, even remote populations that can contribute their insight. On the more process side, it's really what you alluded to, is the human-centered design. I don't know who of you is familiar with this, but again, very simplified. It's to designing first for desirability. So why would they want it? Is kind of the key question you're asking. If you can't answer that question, you don't have to continue, right? Then the next step is like feasibility. Can we build it? Again, if you can't build it, probably don't have to continue. Then comes viability. Should you build it? Right? Which is a little bit more strategic question. Could be a financial association there. Is really the business modeling of the piece. And I like to add always still a fourth component, which traditionally is not part of human-centered design explicitly, which is the worthiness of exchange. Adoption of innovation is about value exchange. Typically, you pay for something, right? So somehow you have made the decision that whatever you're paying for is worth the money you're giving up. In many of the innovations we're talking about, it might be though other things, right? It might be for some volunteers to give up their time, right? It could be for some people that are resistant to give up their attitudes. We talked about culture here early on. I think you've talked about culture, you know, is like maybe giving up some misconceptions or so, or some behaviors, right? And so no matter how great the value is that you're trying to create with your innovation, if at the end the target user or any stakeholder in the system doesn't think it's enough value or can't tap into that value, you will not arrive at an innovation, right? And we have the majority of great ideas ends up like that. Like, there's just not the recognition from the end user side of how to adopt it. But just to go on my list of other benefits of inclusion is obviously resource pooling, right? You can create synergies of various groups and people. Another great advantage of innovation is, inclusiveness, is part of human-centered design is also this rapid prototyping and iteration, right? Not waiting till the very end until you are beyond the point of no return and you have to build it now because you spent so much money already. But along the way to have those rapid iterations, and through inclusion you have great test beds, right? You have great platforms to try it out with the actual end users and not in a vacuum. It's a great benefit of inclusiveness, and it comes with a very nice byproduct, which is buy-in. If you involve people from the get-go into what you're trying to do for them, they're much more likely to adopt at the end what you made for them than if you top-down create something and this is the great innovation for you and you should use it because it's going to change your life for the better. So that it's a great byproduct of human-centered design and involving actually the target users. And again, all the stakeholders in the ecosystem actually in the process, because any one of them can create a barrier that you cannot overcome, or that is just too costly to overcome. And last but not least, any one of those stakeholders that you're including can challenge you, which is extremely important, right? We often design at the beginning and then we just think it's gonna work this way. And the most important aspect of innovation is failing. Because only from failure do you learn. From successes you don't learn, right? And so also again, I'm supposed to talk about knowledge management, knowledge sharing, right? There's not enough sharing of the failures because they often buried and hidden, they stigmatized. And I think we have to do much more to communicate the learnings from failure so that others don't do the same things again. It also adds to the credibility of the process. If you say, we tried 15 times and the 16th time it works, but the first 15 created great learnings for us for other areas. And so knowledge management actually is a core component of the whole innovation process, because you constantly have to solicit input from people. You have to make it consumable to the various different stakeholders of your ecosystem. You have to disseminate it through communication. You have to archive it, because often innovations are ahead of their time, right? 3 years later, actually the technology is ready, or the political system is ready, and then you want to find them and dig them out and jump on them, right? If you don't archive them well and manage them well and curate them well, then it's never gonna happen. And I'm pretty sure currently these systems are not in place. So you're doing it over and over and over and over again. And you're always a little bit ahead of the curve, right? And then also, from all this knowledge, we have now the technology to actually do data mining and identify patterns. So we can use the data that we created in the innovation process to create new insights for new innovations. And that's what makes the whole system sustainable, right? Innovation is not something that ever stops or that ever should stop, because the world changes, the environment changes, the challenges change all the time. And so there we have a self-feeding mechanism, if you want, of creating new insight for the next round of innovations. And so again, knowledge management, human-centered design, innovation, they are actually part of the same system that you could just summarize in continuous improvement, right? Maybe the creative way. Thank you.